Good day, my name is Professor Vernon Gale. I'm Professor of Sociology and Social Statistics at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm a co-director of the ESRC National Centre for Research Methods. At the current time, the National Centre for Research Methods are unable to provide any face-to-face teaching. I hope that you and your families are all healthy during this difficult period. The video that follows will introduce this topic and provide some background information. There is increasing concern across a wide range of academic disciplines that empirical results cannot be reproduced because of a lack of transparency in the research process. Over the last 2 decades, there has been increasing anxiety that it is impossible to verify the results presented in many research papers. There is growing interest in the need for researchers to provide additional materials alongside traditional publications to enable other researchers to understand, evaluate, and better build upon previous research work. The purpose of these materials is to provide sufficient information for a third party that is unconnected with the original work to reproduce results without any additional information being provided by the original authors. The focus of this video is social science research that employs statistical techniques to analyse observational data, for example, social surveys. Many of the issues associated with undertaking transparent and reproducible data analysis pervade other forms of social science research, for example, qualitative data analysis, despite the different nature of the data and the analytical techniques that are used. The problem. Conventional publications, for example those in paper-based journals, do not provide sufficient space for researchers to detail exactly how they undertook the research. Therefore, the final publication might be best regarded as the tip of the iceberg of the research process. In a similar vein, nearly 25 years ago, John Claerbout stated that in engineering, a published paper should be considered as the advertisement for the scholarship. In social science research enterprises, such as the analysis of social surveys, the researcher begins with a raw, i.e. unprocessed dataset. Typically, this is a dataset that has been downloaded from a national archive. In practice, a great deal of work usually goes into transforming the raw data prior to the analysis commencing. This data enabling or data wrangling process comprises tasks associated with preparing the data, the raw dataset, and transforming it into an analytical dataset suitable for statistical analyses. This data enabling work will include operations such as appropriately coding missing values and recoding values into a suitable format that is required for the specific piece of research. Typically, in this phase, the data analyst must select appropriate measures and decide how to operationalize them. These choices will be guided both by theoretical considerations and by practical requirements. Variable selection is not a trivial activity, however, and genuine research datasets may contain a wide range of variables and can commonly contain different measures of key analytical concepts such as income, socioeconomic status, and education. Analytical datasets are the products of the decisions that are made and the actions that are taken during the data enabling phase. These include which cases to include, operationalizing and coding measures, and so on. These decisions combined and they ultimately result in analytical datasets that are too complicated to be reverse engineered from the limited information that is routinely provided in conventional published outputs. Indeed, it is usually impossible to reverse engineer analytical datasets from published results, such as the output tables of statistical models. Without access to the analytical dataset, research findings cannot be genuinely reproduced. The findings from a single social science study should seldom be considered as being definitive. In a similar manner to the natural or physical sciences, social science knowledge is cumulative and empirical research is incremental. Social research findings will almost always be strengthened by additional work that verifies its generality or ubiquity. The extent to which a finding can be reproduced in other research domains is therefore an important barometer. The case for greater transparency. Transparency is a central tenet in reproducible research because without it, research cannot feasibly be reproduced. Increasingly, transparency in statistically orientated social science research is intrinsically attractive for a number of reasons. Greater transparency will increase the capacity to understand how the research was conducted, help other scholars evaluate the analyses undertaken, aid the detection of errors and inconsistencies, facilitate the incremental development of work, contribute to limiting negative research practices, provide extra safeguards against nefarious practices, and improve confidence in results within and beyond the academic community. Duplication and replication. Following Nicole Jantz, we argue that it is fruitful to divide reproducibility into two related concepts. The first concept is duplication. A study can be duplicated if sufficient information is made available which ensures that consistent results can be produced when the same analytical techniques are applied to the same data. An analysis can be duplicated when a third party that is unconnected with the original analysis can produce identical results. The facility to duplicate work is essential for evaluating empirical research. The second concept is replication. A replication study extends the original work with additional measures, alternative measures, new data, or different statistical analysis techniques, or any combination of these four components. A sensible first stage in a replication study is the duplication of the original results. Replication studies are important because the methodological extension of the work, i.e. additional measures, alternative measures, new data, or alternative statistical techniques, is what will test the robustness of the original research. A fundamental aspect of working transparently and enabling reproducibility is data availability. Providing access to the analytical dataset represents a major step forward in enabling the duplication of the original published results. Data should be shared in line with the FAIR principles, which ensure that the standards of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability are met. In studies where data cannot be shared, then it is imperative that researchers clearly identify which raw dataset has been used. Some protocols, e.g. from the National Data Archives, are emerging. These protocols indicate how researchers should ensure that they are appropriately identifying the dataset so that other researchers are able to access exactly the same data resource. An important element of the data citation is that it must include detailed information, preferably in a static format, identifying the specific version of the data which has been used in order to ensure that they are identical to the data used in the original study. The workflow and code sharing. Following J. Scott Long, we use the term workflow to describe the process of planning, organising, executing and documenting social science analyses. The process begins with conceptualising analyses and includes all of the steps associated with completing the work. The initial steps in the research process are likely to include applying for ethical approval, applying for access to the data, downloading the raw data, and producing the analytical data set. The latter steps are likely to include analysing the data, presenting results, refining results, writing up, and then publishing findings. And the final step will be archiving files associated with the project. The central spine of the workflow is the audit trail. The audit trail can be thought of as a useful path of breadcrumbs back through the research process. It is implausible for social scientists to expect to transform raw datasets into analytical datasets or to undertake statistical analyses without using a computer. It is commonplace for both data enabling and data analysis to be undertaken using a data analysis software package or a statistical programming language. At the current time, SPSS, Stata and R are the most commonly used statistical data analysis programs in social science. Software can be operated in different ways, but the structure of many raw social science datasets and the intricacy of the variety of tasks associated with transforming the raw data into an analytical dataset means that writing out software commands in a programming or syntactical format is a highly effective approach. Similarly, the complexity of many analyses means that documenting software commands in a programming or syntactical format rather than using graphical user interfaces, GUIs, i.e. drop-down menus, is far more effective. The software commands for SPSS are usually written within syntax files. Within Stata, they are written in .do files, and in R, they will be written in scripts. The software commands required for transforming the raw data into an analytical dataset and the software commands that drive statistical data analyses are referred to as research code. Openly sharing data enabling research code allows third parties who are unconnected with the original research to transform the raw data into an analytical dataset. Openly sharing data analysis research code allows researchers who are unconnected with the original to duplicate published results, therefore making the workflow that produces a published study openly available is fundamental to research transparency and is the foundation of reproducible social science. Documenting the workflow. Sharing research code is essential for understanding all of the steps undertaken to produce the research output. The effectiveness of shared code for reproducing results is completely contingent on how easily it can be understood by a third party that is not connected with the original work. In particular, ineffective organisation and insufficient documentation are central issues that limit how easily and how well others can comprehend research code and ultimately reproduce work. Social scientists can gain useful insights from the paradigm of literate programming. Don Knuth suggested that the traditional attitude to the construction of computer programs should change. Instead of imagining that the main task is to instruct a computer, the emphasis should be on explaining to human beings what the researcher wanted the computer to do. In essence, the codebook is reported alongside an explanation of its logic in a human readable format, e.g. plain English. At the most fundamental level, literate programming involves ensuring that the research code, for example the SPSS syntax file, the stata.do file or the R script, is adequately supported by comments which explain the particular element of the workflow. For example, here is a literate comment about constructing a variable which is alongside the code used to undertake that operation. Current resources such as Jupyter Notebooks may prove useful in the production of more literate social science workflows. This is because they allow researchers to weave a narrative alongside both statistical data analysis code and results. This is appealing and improves upon plain text code files. Making the workflow public. To enable transparency and facilitate reproducibility, the research code should be shared alongside the output, for example, the journal article, as an online supplementary material. In practice, the format and location of these materials will depend on the policies and practices of the academic journal. Currently, most social science journals do not require researchers to share their data analysis code, but something of a quiet revolution is underway. The Transparency and Openness Promotion (TOP) guidelines are a set of standards which aim to improve the transparent reporting of research findings in academic journals. An example of current good practice. Connolly and Gale, 2019, published a paper analysing existing large-scale social science datasets, and they provided an open and transparent workflow. This analysis of social inequalities used existing data from two of the UK's long-running birth cohort studies, the 1958 National Child Development Study and the 1970 British Cohort Study. The entire workflow that produced the paper was published within a Jupyter notebook. The accompanying notebook included full details of all of the stages of the analysis process. From the initial stage of data acquisition, i.e. downloading the data from the UK Data Archive, and then through the stages of data wrangling, exploratory data analysis, statistical modelling, sensitivity analysis, and writing up and reporting results. The intricacies of the analytical process, for example, decisions and actions for selecting cases, the protocol and techniques for handling missing data, and the construction and coding of measures are fully disclosed. The notebook provides sufficient information for a third party who is unconnected with the original work to reproduce the results without any additional information being provided by the original authors. In line with the FAIR principles, findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability, the Jupyter Notebook was also made available on GitHub and the Open Science Framework. The capacity to understand exactly how research was conducted will be revolutionized by researchers making their complete workflows publicly available. Having access to the analytical dataset or the information required to reconstruct the analytical dataset allows scholars to duplicate research. The ability to duplicate research results not only helps others in the field to evaluate analyses, but also dramatically aids the detection of errors and inconsistencies. The capacity to duplicate results is foundational for replication studies. Replication studies extend the original work. For example, with additional measures, alternative measures, new data, or alternative statistical data analysis techniques. Replication studies offer great potential to improve the capacity to evaluate social science research findings. They also allow us to appropriately locate them within the corpus of existing research evidence. Replication studies are also critical in establishing the extent to which findings constitute empirical regularities. Increased transparency has the potential to limit negative research practices. A notable example is publication bias, the term used to describe the phenomenon of a distortion in reporting knowledge. One invidious form of publication bias is the greater likelihood of statistically significant results being published in academic journals, as publishers may be reticent to publish non-statistically significant results. An interconnected issue is researchers' selective reporting of non-significant empirical findings, which is often referred to as the file draw problem. This terminology conveys the notion that undesirable results often go no further than the researcher's file draws, and this in turn leads to bias in published research. Open access to the complete workflow makes a contribution to limiting publication bias. This is because it provides opportunities for the wider research community to have access to the results that hitherto would have been inaccessible because they were unpublished. There are a range of subjective decisions that researchers must make to motivate any study. For example, these actions might include theoretical decisions relating to the research question, pragmatic decisions on choosing data, and practical efficiencies associated with developing the analytical dataset. Researchers will also make theoretical and practical judgments in order to select measures. They'll also be required to make decisions on which data analytical methods to employ. Statistical methods are not mechanical, and further decisions will be required on the technical issues such as model choice. Ultimately then, decisions will be made about which aspects of the analyses are emphasised in reporting. This spectrum of subjective decisions is sometimes described as researcher degrees of freedom. The positive aspect of the degree of freedom afforded to researchers is that it enables the suitable formulation of empirical work. The negative aspect of this freedom is that it opens up opportunities for pernicious research practices such as p-hacking and harking, hypothesizing after the result is known. An obvious practice which provides extra safeguards against pernicious research practices is pre-registering a pre-analysis plan. This requires researchers to submit a document describing the analysis they plan to carry out, which forms a public record. The use of pre-analysis plans has gained traction in some areas, for example, randomized controlled trials, RCTs. It is more difficult, however, to provide credible pre-analysis plans for the analysis of observational data such as social surveys. This is due in part to the form of the raw data sets and the data enabling work that is almost always routinely required prior to data analysis. Some progress has, however, been made in areas such as economics. In the absence of pre-registering pre-analysis plans, open access to the complete workflow, especially when it is appropriately documented, is a positive development in providing safeguards. As well as providing protection against pernicious research practices, improved transparency provides extra safeguards against nefarious practices such as data fraud. In conclusion, increasing transparency and facilitating the duplication of results and the incremental development of empirical research through replication is likely to improve confidence in social science results both within and beyond the academic community. At the current time, the UK is in lockdown due to the coronavirus emergency. The National Centre for Research Methods would have been providing face-to-face training, but at the current time this is not possible. I would like to thank my colleagues Dr. Roxanne Connolly and Dr. Christopher Playford, who I had intended to deliver a workshop with on the topic of undertaking transparent and reproducible data analysis, but at the current time this isn't possible. The video that you've just watched will be followed up with more information that will be available from the NCRM website.
People who truly understand what is meant by self-reliance know they must live their lives by ethics rather than rules. Technology and the impact of technology seems to change at unprecedented rates. Our laws and rules also change, but nowhere near the rate of change for technology. It can feel like the story of the tortoise and the hare, a race between unequal partners, inviting conflicting interpretations. Technology, the hare, races to the finish line, while the laws, the tortoise, plod along to the finish line laboriously in pursuit. Ethics can help us navigate this perplexing race between technological change, rules, and the law. What is ethics anyway? Ethics is the study of what it means to do the right thing. The right thing is not always obvious. The study of ethics goes deep, and separate points of view emerge on the topic. Many will regard ethics as universal, unique, and applying to all, while others consider ethics to be more like a set of rules providing a framework and a context. Most assume ethics involves rational people making free choices. We may hear the terms ethics and morals used equally. We might ponder ethics as what ought to be the right thing, and morals as what is the right thing during a moment in time. As we engage ethics and technology, we'll want to consider these differences. We'll also want to keep in mind the different ways we look at ethics and the philosophical approaches to ethics. One such approach is a deontological approach. With this approach, ethics are more like absolute rules which must always be applied, regardless of the consequences. The classic example of this approach is the rule, "Do not lie under any circumstance." We can think of many examples where holding to the rule may lead to bad consequences. Another ethical approach is that of utilitarianism. With utilitarianism, we consider the consequences of an act, decide how it relates to the affected people, and we work out the utility of the act. With this approach, we consider an act good if it increases utility for all, and wrong if it decreases it. Like the deontological approach, we might see shortcomings with utilitarianism. While an act can increase utility for all, it can hurt individuals. This conflict of bad consequences with the deontological view and damage to individuals with utilitarianism leads us to consider the natural rights of the individual. A natural rights approach views ethical behavior as acting in such a way that respects a set of fundamental rights of others, including the rights to life, liberty, and property. This approach focuses on the results of how people interact. In employing a natural rights approach, one might consider an act unethical if it leaves people at a loss of these fundamental rights. Rights and interpreting them are often conceived of as negative or positive rights. It might be easier to use the terms liberties and claim rights instead of negative and positive when we study ethical issues in computing. Negative rights or liberties are conceived as allowing people to act without interference. This approach views ethical behavior as acting in such a way that respects a set of fundamental rights of others, including the rights to life, liberty, and property. We can cite many things the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees us negative rights or liberties. Positive rights or claim rights can be rights that impose something on people for the benefit of others. For example, a radio station may not want to give airtime for everyone. When we force a radio station to give equal airtime for political ads, we are doing so by interpreting freedom of speech as a claim right. As you might surmise, liberties and claim rights can come into conflict. It may befit us to clarify how we interpret rights when we talk about them. The golden rule is a general rule for how to behave that argues you should treat people the way you would like other people to treat you. When it comes to ethical behavior, the golden rule may be a valuable resource. It is simple and direct, yet leaves room for choice and consideration of others. One thing that is clear is that solving ethical problems is not free from doubt nor easy. Human behavior, choices, and actions can be complex. As we think about our ethical choices, let us consider these factors. Acts can be thought of as right, wrong, or okay. Harm alone may not be enough to call an act unethical. Goals and constraints may come into conflict when taking action. Ethical decisions may be right or wrong, yet we may approve or disapprove of them. And ethical principles may help us pass laws which can set standards and leave room for voluntary choice. As you consider ethical approaches to technology-related issues, take into account the suggested framework for working with issues. We want to be sure to define the technology and the change or changes taking place due to the technology. We'll also want to make sure we describe the consequences, both intentional and unintentional, that are or may take place because of the technology and the change. The technology, the changes, and the consequences create issues. Issues are the reason we formulate, test, talk about, or debate. State the issues and offer a context for the issues. In using our framework, we'll have a solid foundation for approaching the issues in a reasonable way. Now consider the ethical perspectives we've outlined earlier. While not an exhaustive list of perspectives, the deontological, utilitarians, liberties, claim rights, and golden rule approaches give a manageable set of views for contemplating issues. Consider these approaches, choose one or many approaches to look at the issue, and interpret any rights that may be involved. These first 6 building blocks of the framework can give a solid footing for working with any technology and change. With this solid understanding and footing, you'll be in a position to, as St. Ignatius of Loyola once said, go forth and set the world on fire.
Researchers in social sciences typically do empirical studies to make or support or refute causal claims. While running a regression analysis does not require that you understand much about causality, understanding what our causal claims are actually about is very useful in the long run because it allows you to evaluate when a particular research design or particular statistical analysis technique can provide valid evidence for causality. However, defining causality is not that straightforward, and there are many different ways that we can define what causality actually means. In this video, I will explain one of the most commonly used theories for causality, the counterfactual model. So in a research methods course or a book about research methods, you may have seen this kind of explanation for making causal claims. So we are supposed to demonstrate 3 different conditions: association, direction of influence, and then elimination of rival explanations. We are also told that the best way to demonstrate the direction of influence empirically is to measure the cause before the effect, and that there are 2 main ways of eliminating rival explanations: the randomized experiment, where you have treatment and control and people are assigned to those groups randomly. One of the groups gets the treatment, one of them doesn't, and then we compare the outcomes of those 2 different groups afterwards. And then we are also told that statistical modeling can be applied when we don't have an experimental design, when we're simply doing a correlational study. Further, we can have figures like that demonstrate the logic of the golden standard, the experiment. So we have the population of interest. We take a sample for that, assign randomly in the treatment and control. One group receives the treatment, other one doesn't, then we measure something from both groups and we compare the outcome, and that is our estimate of the causal effect. Now, there are two important questions or two important issues about this model. So what is this actually based on? So how is it possible that we say that this difference is actually a valid estimate of a causal effect? And the second issue is that this model or this research design actually does not provide us a causal effect, but instead it gives us the average treatment effect. So why cannot we get an individual level causal effect? That's something that I will address next. But before we go into that, we need to understand what causality is and why we need to define causality in some way to do research. This is addressed pretty well in this chapter by Hitchcock, from which I've taken this small excerpt. And Hitchcock explains that there are basically two reasons why we need to define causality in a way that does not involve the term cause. So we need to have these ways of defining causality that does not require the concept of causality itself. And this is important for the practical reason that we cannot observe causality in action. So if we put an object made of wax outside in direct sunlight on a hot day, it will melt, but we really cannot see. We know that the sun is causing the object to melt, but we cannot see the causality in action. We know that it is out there, it's sunny, and the wax object is melting, but we really cannot observe that it's actually the sun causing the object to melt. So we cannot observe causality directly. Therefore, for empirical research purposes, we need a way to define causality that does not require observation of causality itself, but something that is actually observable. So we need an operational definition for causality. Then there is the metaphysical argument that if we can do away with causality as like one of the principal things or the original lowest level things in the world, then our description of the world is simpler, which is always better. So there are a few different main theories for causality. One of them is the regularity theory of causality, which basically means that if cause always precedes the effect, then we can say that there's a causal relationship. But that's problematic because it's possible that the effect would have occurred anyway. And to address that, we have the counterfactual model for causality. So where does the idea and the term counterfactual come from? Let's take a look at the experiment again. So let's consider that we want to estimate the causal effect on an individual. So typically when you go to a doctor and the doctor prescribes you a medication, you are not really interested in what is the average effect of that medication on people, but you are interested in knowing what is the effect that that medication has on me. And that is a question that experiment cannot answer directly. The reason is that the causal effect of a medication can be defined through the difference of these two what we'll call potential outcomes. So the idea of the potential outcomes framework, or Rubin's potential outcome framework, which is the term that's used for this model in some contexts, is that an individual has two options to go. Either the individual goes to the treatment group or the individual goes to the control group. And let's assume that the individual receives the treatment. So this is the actual outcome. So what is the health, for example, after the individual has taken a medication? And then we have the other potential outcome, which we call the counterfactual. So this is the outcome that could have happened but did not. So this is counterfactual because we don't observe this outcome. And the causal effect with this model can be defined as the difference between what actually happened what's the actual outcome compared to the counterfactual outcome, what would have happened if the person had not taken the medication. So for example, if I'm holding this remote here and I'm releasing my hand and causing the remote to drop, that we could say that the regularity theory says that if I open my hand, then the remote drops, and that is enough for causality. For counterfactual model, we need to actually make two different claims. We have the regularity claim, I opened my hand, the remote dropped, and we also have the counterfactual claim. Had I not opened my hand, the remote would not have dropped. And that's the idea of a counterfactual argument. So how does this counterfactual model between comparing actual outcomes and counterfactual outcomes that we don't observe, how do we then actually operationalize this model? Because we cannot see the counterfactual. We cannot observe something that could have happened but did not. In practice, the counterfactual modeling approaches simply, they don't try to estimate the individual causal effect, because that is simply in most cases impossible. Rather, we are focusing on the average causal effect. So the idea of doing an experiment here is that, for example, in experimental design, is that we have one group. Let's say we have the treatment group, which is our actual outcome. We measure or estimate some effect for the actual group, and then we construct kind of like an artificial outcome through research design and for the counterfactual. In the context of experiment, in a valid experiment, we can make an assumption that the control group is a pretty good counterfactual for the treatment group in the case that the treatment group would not have received the treatment. So the treatment group is the actual outcome, and the control group becomes the counterfactual outcome for the treatment group. And of course we can refine this reasoning and make designs where we estimate the average effect of the treatment on the treated and so on. And then we compare the actual outcome and the counterfactual, estimated counterfactual, and then that gives us the estimate of the causal effect. This model works pretty well on paper, but it requires assumptions. So we need to assume that the control group is a valid counterfactual for the treatment group. And the important thing about these assumptions is that they must be defensible. So in the counterfactual model, because we cannot observe the counterfactual, we need to estimate it, and then we need to make assumptions and also defend those assumptions to make the claim that our estimated counterfactual is actually a valid estimate. In practice, many of our statistical analysis techniques are compatible with this way of viewing causality. Researchers in social sciences typically do empirical studies to make
differences
or
analysis
support or
is
refute
one of the early
causal
techniques
claims.
for causal
While
analysis.
running a
using
regression
quasi-experimental
analysis
data.
does not require that you
technique,
understand
which
much
is
about
sometimes
causality,
seen in robustness
understanding
checks in
what our
correlational
causal claims
studies,
are actually
however,
about
requires
is
some
very useful
assumptions
in the
that
long
are
run,
critically
because it
important
allows
to
you
justify
to evaluate
before we
when
can interpret the
a particular
results
research
of a
design
difference
or
in
particular
differences
statistical analysis
as
technique
causal evidence.
can provide
Let's
valid
take a look
evidence
at what
for
difference
causality.
in differences
However,
actually does.
defining causality
So,
is not that
in
straightforward,
experimental
and there are many different
research,
ways
the
that
key
we can
idea
define
was
what
that we have the
causality
randomization
actually
here,
means.
and because
in
of
this video, I will
randomization, the
explain
treatment
one
and
of the
control
most commonly
are
used
comparable
causality,
in large
the
samples, or they
counterfactual
are
model.
identical in large samples,
So
so
in
we can make
a
the valid
research
causal
methods
claim.
course or a book
The
about
problem
research
is
methods,
that
you
if
may
this
have
randomization
seen
is
this kind
missing,
of
or one of the
explanation
problems
for
if the
making causal
randomization is
claims.
missing
So
is
we are
that it is
supposed to
possible
demonstrate three
that
different
the treatment
conditions:
and control are different
association,
to start with.
direction of
So
influence,
if the
and then
treatment and
elimination of
control
rival
are
explanations.
different
We are also
on the observed
told
characteristics,
that
for
the
example,
best
health,
way to
then
demonstrate
we really
the direction
cannot
of
tell
influence
whether the
empirically
difference
is to measure
post-treatment
the cause
is due to
before
the treatment
effect,
Or
and
is it just
that there are
a difference
two main
that
ways
exists
of eliminating
pre-treatment
rival
that just
explanations.
persists over the study?
The randomized
And
experiment where you have
differences
treatment and control,
designed to address this
and
scenario.
people are assigned to
So
those
the
groups
idea of
randomly.
difference in differences
One of the
is
groups
that it
gets the
applies
treatment,
to
one of
this
them doesn't, and then
quasi-experimental,
we
non-equivalent
compare
control
the
group design.
outcomes of those
So the
two
idea
different
here is that
groups
we cannot
afterwards.
really compare
And then we are also
these
told
two groups
that
after the
statistical
treatment,
modeling can be
because
applied
there could be
when we don't have an
a difference that
experimental design
exists
where we're
before the
simply doing a
treatment,
correlation
and we
study.
cannot either
Further,
compare
we
the
can have
treatment group before
figures
and after
like that
the treatment
that
because it is
demonstrate the
possible
logic of
that
the
there will
golden
be
standard,
a change
the
over
experiment.
time
So
anyway.
we have the
So
population
difference
of
in
interest. We
differences
take
addresses
a sample for
these
that
two
as a
problems
randomly in the treatment
this
and
scenario.
control.
How
One
the
group
difference in
receives the
differences
treatment,
works
other one
is
doesn't.
that we
Then
measure
something
two
from
groups.
both groups.
We
and
measure
compare
both
the
groups
outcome,
before the treatment and after
that
the
is
treatment.
our
No
estimate of
randomization
the
is
causal
required.
effect. Now,
And the
there are
main
two important questions
differences
or two
comes
different
from
issues
the,
about this model.
The main idea of this
what is
technique.
this actually based
So the
on?
idea of
So
the technique
how
is that
it
we
possible
first calculate the
that we
difference
say
before
that
the
this
treatment
difference
here,
is actually
then we
a
calculate
valid
the
estimate of
difference
causal
after
effect.
the treatment,
And the
then
second issue
difference
is
in
that
those
this
differences
model
here
or
the
this
delta
research design
is
actually
the causal effect.
does not
So if the
provide
difference
us a
between the
causal
treatment and
effect,
control
but instead
grows
it
over
gives us
time
the
after
average
the treatment,
effect.
then we conclude that the treatment
why
had a
cannot
positive
we
effect.
get an
If the
individual level
difference
causal effect?
between the treatment and
That's
outcome
something that I will
decreases or
address
becomes more
next.
negative
But
over
before
time
we go into
after
that,
the
we need to
treatment,
understand
then we conclude
what
that the causal
causality
effect is
is
negative.
and why.
So
we
here
need
we
to
have
define causality
lambda,
in some way.
the initial
to do
difference. So that's the first difference.
This is addressed
Then we
pretty
have
well
baseline change
in
over
our
time. We are
chapter
typically
by
not
Hitchcock
interested in
from
this
which
baseline
I've
change over
taken
time,
this
but
small
that would
excerpt.
is the change that
And,
prevents us from just comparing the
explains that
treatment
there are
group against
basically
itself
two reasons
before and
why
after the treatment.
we need
And
to
then we
define
have the treatment
causality in a way
delta here.
that does
So,
not involve
how
the
do
term
we
cause.
then
So we need
do
to
this in
have these
practice? We
ways
could
of
calculate
defining
the two
causality
differences
that does
and then
not require the
subtract
concept
them. But
of
the problem is
causality
that if we
itself.
do that in Excel, for
And
example,
this
then
is
how would we
important
calculate
for the
standard?
practical reason
In
that
practice,
we cannot
this analysis
observe
is typically carried
causality in
out
action.
using
So
a
if
simple
we
regression
put
model.
an object
So we have a
made of
regression
wax
model here.
outside
We
in
have
direct sunlight on a hot
the
day,
D, the treatment,
it will
T, the
melt.
time,
But
and then we have
we really cannot see. We know that
beta
the sun
1
is
for
causing
the
the object to melt, but we cannot see the
treatment,
causality
beta
in
2 for
action.
time,
We
and then
know that it is
interaction
out
between
there,
treatment
it's sunny,
and time. And how do we
the
interpret
wax
this?
object is
Well,
melting, but we really
beta
cannot
1 is the initial
observe
difference.
that it's actually
Marginal
the
effect
sun
of D
causing
at
the
T
object to melt.
is 0. So
So
that's
we
the
cannot
difference
observe
between
causality
before the
directly.
treatment.
Therefore,
And then we have
for empirical
beta 2 is the
research
baseline
purposes,
change over time.
we
So it's
need a
marginal
way to
effect
define
of
causality
time
that
for the
does
control
not
group. And
require
then beta
observation
3 is
of
the
the
treatment
causality
effect.
itself,
It tells us
but
how
something
much
that is
the
actually
difference
observable. So we
between
need
the
an
treatment and
operational
control
definition for
increased
causality.
over time when
Then there's
we
the
went
metaphysical
from
argument
from
that
pre to post treatment.
if we can do
So,
away with causality,
very simple. So you just
as
need two
like
variables
one of the principal things,
and their
or
interaction,
the,
and then you have a
the
causal
original
effect.
lowest level
Of
things
course,
in
if
the
that
world,
will also
then
always give
our
us causal
description of the
effect,
world is
the
simpler,
life
which
of a
is
researcher
always
would be
bare.
very simple.
So
But
there are
it does not. It requires
few
some
different
very
main
strong assumptions. And we
theories
need to
for
understand those
causality.
assumptions,
One
and then
of
also
them
justify
is
those
the
assumptions in
regularity
our
theory of
article
causality, which
to actually
basically
make
means
this
that
technique produce any
cause
valid
always
causal estimate.
precedes the effect.
Because this
then
is simply a
we can
regression
say that
model,
there's
it's
a
useful to
causal
start
relationship.
with the regression
But that's
assumptions. This is
problematic
from Bullrich.
because it's possible
We have
that
6
the
different
effect would have
assumptions,
occurred
and
anyway.
not all of those are equally important.
And to
Let's
address
take a look
that,
at
we have
which
the
assumptions
counterfactual
are
model for causality.
possibly
So where does
violated,
the
and
idea
one
and
of
the
the
term
assumptions is
counterfactual
always
come
violated.
from?
And that's
Let's
difference
take a
in
look
differences
at the
analysis.
experiment again.
When you
So,
read about difference in differences,
let's consider
that we want to
explanations
estimate
or
the causal
introductions to this
effect on an
technique
individual.
usually mentions
So
that it
typically when you
relies
go to a
on
doctor
parallel
and
trends,
the
the
doctor
doctor
the idea here is that
prescribes you a
in parallel
medication.
trends is
You
that
are not really interested
the
in
control develops over
what is
time,
the average effect
and then the
of that
treatment
medication
group
on
develops over time
people,
as well.
but you are interested
And
in knowing
for
what
the
is the
causal
effect
inference to be
that
valid
that
for this
medication has on me.
delta to be a
And,
valid estimate
that
of
is
the
a
causal
question
effect, correct.
that
We have to assume
experiment cannot
that the
answer
treatment
directly.
would have
The reason is
would have developed
that
the same way over
difference,
time
the causal
as the
effect of a
control group
medication
did
can
had
be
the
defined
treatment group not
through
received
these,
the treatment.
the difference of these
So
two,
the
what we would
development
call potential
of the
outcome.
control group
So the
is
idea
used
of
as
the potential
counterfactual
outcomes
for the
framework
development of
or
the treatment
Rubin's
group
potential
had it not
outcome
received the
framework,
treatment, which we don't really observe.
is the term that's
And
used
this is
for
critically
model
important
in
assumption,
some
because if the
contexts
parallel trends
is
assumption
that
does not
an
hold,
individual
then
has
our
two
estimates will be
options
inconsistent
to go.
and causal
Either the
inference will be
individual goes
invalid.
to the treatment group,
So for example,
or
what
the
would this
individual
parallel
goes to
trends
the
mean?
control group.
Let's assume,
let's assume that
we
the
have a
individual
medical
receives
trial,
the treatment.
we have sick
So this
people
is
and we
the
have healthy
actual
people.
outcome.
And
So
then
what is
all
the
the healthy
health,
people
for
decide that they
example,
will go
after
for
the
the control, all the
individual
sick
has
people
taken the
decide that they will
medication.
go for the treatment.
And then we have
then we
the
compare
other
the health
potential outcome,
over time.
which we call the counterfactual. So this is the
People
outcome
did
that
not
could have
get
happened,
sick
but
spontaneously,
did not.
or even
So
if
this is
people did not get
counterfactual
cured
because
or get
we
well
don't
spontaneously,
observe this
then there will be
outcome.
no trend over time.
And the causal effect
and any
with
difference
this
after
model
the treatment will
can
be
be
a
defined as the
result
difference
of the medication.
between
So
what
in other
actually
words,
happened,
if the medication is the
what's
only
actual
reason why people
outcome
could get well,
compared to the
then we have
counterfactual outcome,
a
what
clean
would have
causal estimate.
happened
But that's not all,
if
of course,
the
the case.
person had not
if
taken
we have
the
people
medication.
that are
So,
first
for example,
sick to start with,
if I'm
some of
holding
those
this remote
people
here
will get better
and I'm
over
releasing
time,
my
even
hand
if they did not
and
have
causing the remote to
medication.
drop,
So the average health
we
of
could say that the
people
regularity
who are
theory says that if
sick
I
to
open my
start with
hand,
is
then
probably
the
going to
remote drops,
increase over time.
and that is enough for
Also,
causality.
if you have people
For
who are
counterfactual model,
healthy to start
we need
with,
to actually
some of those
make
people will
two
get
different
sick
claims.
during
We have the regularity
study
claim.
period.
I opened my
So
hand,
on average,
the remote dropped,
those people,
and we also have the
their health
counterfactual
will decrease
claim.
over time.
Had I not opened
that's
my
an
hand, the
example
remote
of
would
scenario
not
where the
have
parallel
dropped.
trends does
And
not hold.
that's the idea of a counterfactual.
So
model.
which of these regression
how does
assumptions
this
is
counterfactual
violated
model
when the parallel
between
trends
comparing
assumption
actual
fails?
outcomes and
Let's take a
counterfactual
look at
outcomes that we
the
don't
Riverson
observe?
equation.
How do
So
we
if
then
we have
actually
a non-parallel trend,
operationalize this
it
model?
means that
Because
the
we
effect
cannot see the
of time
counterfactual. We
t
cannot
would
observe
be
something
different
that would
for
have
the
happened,
treatment,
but did
even
not.
if the treatment
In
group
practice,
would not
the
get the
counterfactual
actual
modeling
medication or
approaches
whatever the treatment is.
And
Simply,
if
they
we
don't
reorganize
try
this
to estimate the
equation a
individual
bit,
causal
we
effect
can see
because
that
that is
because we
simply
don't
in most
observe
cases what would be the effect
Rather,
for the
we are
treatment group
focusing on the
had it
average
not
causal
received the
effect.
treatment.
So
This
the
is
idea of
unobserved, and it goes
doing
to
an
the error term.
experiment
And
here
we can see from this
is that
simple
for
rearrangement
example, an experimental
that this
design
error term, which includes
is
the,
that we have
the
one
the
group
trend, let's
of
say we have the treatment group, which is
had
our
it not
actual
received the
outcome.
treatment. We measure
If this
or
beta
estimate
4 is
some,
non-zero, which means that the trends
effect
differ,
for the
then we
actual
have an
group,
endogeneity
and
problem.
then
because
we
this term here
construct
correlates
kind of like an
over
artificial
these two
outcome through
terms here
research
that
design.
contain T.
And
why it correlates
for the
is because beta
In the
4 is
context of
non-negative if the
experiment,
trends are not parallel,
we,
and D
in a
is
valid
1
experiment,
for the
we can
treatment
make
group.
an
So we have an
assumption
endogeneity problem
that
unless
the
the parallel
control
trends
group
holds.
is a pretty good counterfactual.
We have also another
for the
assumption
treatment
that is
group.
violated, and it is
In
the
the case that
non-independence
the
of,
treatment
of observations.
would not have
and
received
the observations are non-independent
treatment group
because
is
we
the
are
actual
measuring
outcome and
each
the control
person
group
twice
becomes the
before the
counterfactual
treatment and
outcome
after treatment.
for the treatment.
And there are probably
And of course we can
some causes
we can
of
refine this
the
reasoning
dependent
and
variable
make
that
designs
persist
where
over
we
time, so
estimate
that
the
if we
average
measure
effect of the
one
treatment on the
individual before the
treated and so
treatment
on.
and the same
then we
individual after
compare
the treatment,
the
those
actual
two
outcome
scores
and the counterfactual
will be more similar to
estimated
one another
counterfactual,
than
and
if
then
we
that
measure
gives us
one
the
individual before the
estimate of the
treatment
causal
and
effect.
another individual after the treatment, and then compare the
This
differences.
model
So we are
works
in violation
pretty
of
well
that assumption.
on
So
paper,
these are the two critical
but it
assumptions
requires
in difference
assumptions.
in differences.
So we need
And
to assume
let's
that
take
the
a look at
control
how
group is a
they
valid
are typically dealt with.
counterfactual for the
So
treatment
this
group.
has to be justified
And
the parallel
the
trends,
important thing about
and this
these
violation has
assumptions
to be
is
dealt with.
that they must be
So the parallel trends
defensible.
assumption
So
or common
in
trends
the
assumption
counterfactual model,
can
because
be
we cannot
justified
observe the
in two different
counterfactual,
ways,
we need to
and
estimate
generally
it,
you should
and
do
then
both
we need to
in your
make
study.
assumptions
So
and
first
also
you should
defend those
provide a
assumptions
conceptual
to make
argument
the claim
based
that
on
our
theory.
counterfactual,
Why do you
estimated
think that the trends should be
counterfactual is
parallel?
actually a valid estimate.
So if we think about,
In practice,
let's say, a person's
many
health, how
of
it evolves
our
over time,
statistical
we should
analysis
start thinking
techniques
about
are
what causes
compatible with
differences
this in the trends,
way of viewing
and then
causality.
whether those causes are
Researchers
present
in social
and also
sciences
different
typically
between
do
our
empirical
treatment group and
studies
control group.
to
This
make
article
or
by Wing
support or
gives a
refute
pretty good
causal claims.
explanation of how you
While
could start
running a
arguing
regression
there
analysis
are the common
does
trends
not
or
require
parallels
that
and
you
assumptions
understand much about causality.
Then there are
Understanding
empirical
what our
ways of
causal
doing
claims
it.
are actually
So you
about
can
is
test the
very
common
useful
trends
in the long
assumption
run
because it
or
allows
let's say
you
test because it is
evaluate
ultimately
when
untestable,
a particular
but you can
research design
provide
or
some
particular
evidence that it
statistical
may
analysis
hold.
technique can
And
provide valid evidence
the
for
idea
causality.
of testing the common
However,
trends
defining
assumption is that
causality
we
is not that
compare how
straightforward,
the trends
and there are many
develop
different ways
before
that
the
we can
treatment.
define what
This is
causality
an
actually
example
means.
from
In this video, I will explain one of the most commonly used theories
they have
of
two groups
causality,
and
the
they compare
counterfactual
that
model.
both groups had the same
a
trend.
research
There
methods
are, the
course or
treatment
a
group
book
was
about
higher,
research methods,
but
you may
we
have
don't
seen this
care
kind
about
of
the level
explanation
differences. We
for
care about the
making causal
differences in
claims.
direction.
So
And
we
these
are
two
supposed
trends,
to
they follow each
demonstrate
other
three
quite
different
closely.
conditions. So
Association.
based on this
direction of
figure,
influence,
the authors
and then
argue that
elimination of
the
rival
trends appear to be
explanations.
parallel.
We are also
so if the
told
control
that
treatment group
the
were not
best
in the
way to
treatment,
demonstrate
they
the
would
direction
probably
of
have been developing
influence somewhere over
empirically
here. But
is to
because they
measure
got
the
the treatment,
cause
it's actually
before the
the
effect.
difference is large.
And that there are
So
two
that's one
main
way.
ways
There
of
is also
eliminating
a
rival
formal way of
explanations.
testing if
The
two trends
randomized
are the
experiment
same
where you have
between
treatment
the
and
before
control,
the
and
treatment.
people are
And,
assigned those groups
how
randomly.
that works is that
One
you
of the
estimate
groups
the
gets the
regression model
treatment,
like that.
one of them
So
doesn't,
basically,
and then
you
we
estimate
compare
a set of
the
time
outcomes of
dummies,
those
D
two
here,
different groups
and then you estimate
and then we are
the
also
set of
told
time
that
dummies,
statistical
D,
modeling can be
multiplied
applied when
by
we don't
D,
have an
which
experimental
indicates
design, when we're
whether
simply doing a correlation
the
study.
individual
Further,
belongs
we can
to the
have
treatment or control,
figures like
and
that
then you test
that
that all
demonstrate
these
the
beta
logic of
2t's
the golden
are
standard
zero using
experiment. So
an
we have
F test
the population
or
of interest.
a Valve
we take
test
a
if you
sample
don't
for that,
use OLS
assign
regress.
randomly in the treatment
And if
control.
all these interactions
One
are
group
zero,
receives the treatment,
then that
other one doesn't.
then we can
then we
infer,
measure something
or we
from
can
both
say
groups, and
that
we
the
compare
trends
the
are
outcome,
probably
and
very similar
that
or
is our
identical
estimate of
before the
causality.
treatment here. So
Now,
that is
there
how
are
you
two
justify
important questions
the
or
common
two
trends
important
assumption.
issues
Two
about
things,
this model.
conceptual arguments,
So what is
and
this
then
actually based on? So
show a graph
how
of the
is it
trend,
possible
tell that they are the same.
that we
If you want to have a
say
bit
that
more
this
rigor,
difference is
then you can test
actually
it empirically
a valid
by
estimate of
estimating
causal
the
effect.
time trends
And
for
the second
the
issue
control group,
is
and then
that this model
for the control
this
group, and then
research design
there are
actually
differences using
does
these
not
interactions
provide us
between
a causal
the time
effect,
dummies
but
and
instead
there
it
are the
gives
variable
us
that
the
indicates
average
the group
treatment
members.
effect.
So that's
So,
the common trends.
why
How about
cannot
the
we
non-independence
get
of
an individual
observations?
level causal effect?
This is something
That's something that
a lot of
address
methodology
next.
of research
But
has
before
been
we go
addressing
into that,
in the
we
last
need to
10 or so
understand
years.
what causality is.
There
and
is
why
still like
we
no
need to
consensus
define
on what is the
causality
best
in some
approach
way
for
to
dealing
do
with this issue methodology.
This is addressed
If you have
pretty
a large
well
sample size,
in this
then
chapter by
cluster
Hitchcock
robust
from
standard errors
which
is
I've
probably
taken this
the
small
ideal
excerpt.
way of
And,
dealing with non-independence of
Hitchcock
observations,
explains
because
that there
the
are
standard error is what
basically
is
two
affected
reasons why
if the
we need to
observations are
define
non-independent.
causality
If you have a small
in a
sample
way
size,
that
then I recommend
does
taking a look
not
at this
involve
Wings
the term
article again,
cause.
and then
So we
they
need to have these
provide lots of
ways
references
of
on
defining
different
causality
techniques.
that
Then
does
you
not
read about
require
those
the
and make a
concept of
decision.
causality
In large
itself.
samples, cluster robust
And
standard
this
errors
is important
are pretty
for
much
the
always
practical
the
reason that
easiest
we
and safe way
cannot
to do.
observe
And that's how
causality
it's
in
done
action.
in, for
So
example,
if we
Mokkon's
put an
article
object
that I
made of
use as an
wax
example in some of my
outside
videos,
in direct sunlight
and they
on a
just
hot
state that they
day,
use cluster
it
robust
will
errors to
melt.
account
But
for
we
repeated
really
measures, and then
cannot
they
see. We
cite
know that
Bertrand's
the sun
paper
is
that
causing the
explains
object to melt,
why
but
this
we
is
cannot
required
see
for
the causality
difference
in
in
action.
difference.
We know that it is out there.
Most
it's sunny,
applications
and
of
the
difference
wax
in
object
differences
is
that I've
melting,
seen in
but we
management
really cannot
research
observe
don't
that
actually
it's
mention this
actually the
issue, so
sun
it's
causing the
possible
object
that
to
it's
melt.
not well known,
So we cannot observe
and it's not
causality
properly
directly.
taken care
Therefore,
of
for
by
empirical
management
research
researchers.
purposes,
We don't know. Maybe
we
they
need
just
a way to define
know about it
causality
but forgot
that
to report.
does not
So let's take a
require
summary of
observation
difference in
of
differences.
causality itself.
And important things
but
about difference in
something
difference
that
is
is
that
actually
it's not any
observable. So
kind
we
of
need an
magic. It's just a
operational
regression
definition of
analysis.
causality.
To a regression analysis.
Then there is the
where you
metaphysical
have,
argument
one
that
binary variable indicating
if we can
time,
do away
another
with
binary variable
causality
indicating whether it's a
as
treatment or
like
control
one
group,
of
and
the
then
principal things
interaction
or
of those
the original lowest
two
level
binary
things in the
variables. Of
world,
course, you can have
then
control
our
variables
description
too.
of the world is simpler,
It depends
which is always
critically
better.
on the parallel
So,
trans assumption.
there are
if the parallel trends
a
assumption
few different
that the
main
treatment group would have developed
theories
the same way as the
causality.
control group had it
One
not
of
been
them
treated,
is
if
the
that assumption
regularity theory
fails,
of causality,
then our
which
causal
basically means that
inferences
if
will be invalid.
cause always
Then we have
precedes
non-independence
the
of
effect,
observations,
then
which is
we can
typically
say that
dealt
there's
with
a
using
causal
cluster
relation.
robust standard errors.
But that's
if you have a
problematic
small sample
because
size,
it's possible
then
that
may
the
not be an
effect would have
ideal
occurred
technique,
anyway.
but in large samples
And
that works
to
well.
address that,
This
we
is
have
applied with
the
quasi-experimental
counterfactual
designs
model for causality.
where you have a
So where does
non-equivalent
the idea
control
and the
group,
term counterfactual
and
come from?
typically how that control
Let's
group
take
is,
a look at the
is
experiment again.
developed or
let's consider
constructed is
that we want to
researchers
estimate
apply
the
some kind of
causal
matching
effect on an
technique. So,
individual.
for example, if you
So
have
typically when you go to a doctor and you
people
the doctor
that are between 30 and
prescribes you a
40 that receive
medication,
the treatment,
you are
then
not
you
really
take the same
interested in
people from the same age group
what is
from
the
general
average
population as a
effect
control.
of that
Of course,
medication
there are
on
more
people,
refined
but you are
matching
interested
strategies,
in knowing
like the
what is the
propensity score
effect
matching, for
that that
example, that can be
medication
applied.
has on me.
So, you have to write a research paper. For some of you, this might mean going to Google, typing in your general topic, and using information from the first 2 or 3 results that you find. For others, this might mean trying to find out everything you possibly can about your topic. Unfortunately, neither of these approaches is likely to get great results. To be done right, research needs to be guided by a focused research question. Without a good research question, you will probably end up with a paper that never really comes together because you didn't have a clear direction. But what exactly is a research question? At the most basic, the research question is just a question related to your topic that needs to be answered. The whole purpose of your research will be to provide an answer to the question. You're probably thinking that this doesn't sound too difficult. If a research question is just a question about your topic, it should be easy to come up with one, right? Well, not exactly. For many students, developing a research question is actually one of the hardest parts of the whole research process. In some cases, a student might not know enough about their topic to even understand the kinds of questions that are possible to ask. Even if the student has some knowledge about the topic, they may still not have a good idea of the whole scope of the topic or of recent developments related to that topic. For this reason, it's usually a good idea to try to do some background research before you try to settle on a specific question. This doesn't have to be extensive or time-consuming. For many of you, simply looking at a Wikipedia article or a few recent news articles related to your topic will be enough to give you some ideas for directions that you want to explore. Once you have a bit of background information, you'll be better able to focus your topic into a good research question. But what makes a question a good research question? There are several things that you need to keep in mind. First, a research question should not be too narrow or too broad. If you could answer your question with a few facts, you're not researching, you're just searching. On the other hand, if you would need to write an entire book to appropriately answer your question, then it's probably not a good question for you either, at least at this level. Your question also needs to be specific. Questions such as, is television a bad influence? Is very vague. Which television programs are you talking about? What audience are you talking about? What exactly do you mean by bad? Making your question a bit more precise will give you more direction for your research. A research question should also have some significance. It should be something that interests you, because you will be spending some time with a topic, but it should also be something that other people might find important as well. This doesn't mean that you can't research topics like popular culture or sports or social media. It just means that you need to frame your research in such a way as to make sure the topic is relevant to more than just you. While you want your topic to be significant, you also want to be careful not to ask the types of questions that can't really be answered. Questions such as, why must people suffer, or what happens after we die, are certainly significant to many people, but very difficult to answer. Keep in mind that research papers are not intended to be philosophical treatises. So, as you can see, asking any old question related to your topic won't work. Fortunately, many poor research questions can be transformed into good research questions with only a few tweaks. For example, the question of, why must people suffer, could be transformed into a more focused question, such as, how have major 20th century Christian theologians explained the purpose of human suffering? Finally, you might also want to make your research question a little bit unique or creative. Some topics have already been researched over and over and over, and you might want to avoid those topics if you can. If you do have a common topic, it's often a good idea to try to find a slightly different angle, something that allows you to add your own twist. After all, research should not be about asking questions that have already been answered many times before.
Created using Powtoon. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Priya Sapaha. This video is dedicated to my final year students who are really keen to know how to write synopsis and dissertation. Dissertation is an integral part of any degree. Before starting any research, it is necessary to choose the title or a topic. That topic or title should reflect the importance of your research and should also answer some of the major questions like which type of problem your dissertation is going to challenge or raise. Secondly, why it is a problem for the research, academics, or any other community. Thirdly, why it is important for you to find a solution of that problem. And fourthly, how you are going to search for the answer. Before writing dissertation, it is necessary to write synopsis. Synopsis gives a clear picture about your idea and perceptions and objective about a particular research which you are going to do in the future. There is a prescribed structure of the dissertation synopsis. The first one is to selection of dissertation topic. The topic is the most important thing for the research, which should be selected wisely. For example, it should be specific, unambiguous, and explicit. That means it should not be vague or prolonged, and it should be about the general, legal, informative, or technical issues at national or international level. The second thing is introduction. It should provide a brief description about the area of the proposed research work in a very concrete, concise, and accurate manner. It must be clear rather than fussy and general. The third thing, which is considered as one of the most important things, and that is a base of a research, is review of literature. To understand review of literature, it is more necessary to understand the meaning of research. The meaning of research is to search again. That means the search has been already done on a specific topic and you are going to review that particular literature and then search again to find something new and essential and very important part of that particular research. And that thing which has not been done previously in the same area of proposed research. It is essential to plan further research efficiently and in an appropriate manner. The information given in the review should be supported by references. The next step is objectives of research. There must be comprehensive objectives of the research work. The objective can be 1 and maximum to 3, not more than that. These objectives will indicate the major aspects and the overall purpose of the study. It should be clearly and concisely defined. These are broad statements of desired outcome or the general intention of the research, which paint a picture of your research work. The maximum aim or objectives should be up to 3. It should not be too extensive. Make accurate use of concept which must be sensible and precisely described. The next step is justification of the problem. Every object needs justification. In research, it is essential to justify your objective in a concrete, impressive, and remarkable manner. You may take help from the previous research work, cases, reports, etc. There is a possibility to predict the specific and general benefits likely to be achieved as a result of completion of the proposed research by making comparison and citing references of the previous work. The next step is hypothesis of study. It is a specific statement of prediction. It describes in concrete terms what you expect will happen in your studies. Hypothesis is a statement which is to be tested for possible acceptance or rejection, although you should aim for a possible acceptance. The next is significance of study. It emphasizes on the significance and importance of the research work, that is, reason and aim of the selection of the topic of research. The next is statement of problem. The researcher has to clarify, identify the problem, issues, which is selected for the thesis or a dissertation. The last step of synopsis is research methodology, which means a plan of work describing the various aspects of the study in a logical sequence along with the methodologies to be employed. It helps to validate that the researchers has a fairly good idea about the nature of work likely to be involved. Methodology includes two things. The first one is empirical research, which means it is a way of gaining knowledge by means of direct and indirect observation or experience. The second is non-empirical research, that is conducted without quantitative data. That means when you use non-numerical data such as observation and interviews. There are two sources of data. First is primary research, which involves gathering new data that has not been collected before. For example, with the help of surveys, using questionnaires or interviews with groups of people in a focus groups and observation. Secondary research involves gathering existing data that has already been produced. For example, researching the newspaper and company reports, case studies, diaries, critical incidents, portfolios, books, journals, periodicals, abstracts, index, directory, research report, conference papers, market report, annual report, internal record of organization, newspaper, magazine, CD-ROMs, online database, internet, video, and broadcast. At the end of the synopsis, you may write references and bibliography, which should be written in a standard pattern. And the standard pattern of bibliography I will explain in my next video. But it is not at all necessary to write bibliography in the synopsis, although it is essential to write in the dissertation as well in the thesis. Now, there is a very common question which is asked by the student, that what should be the length of the synopsis. It is really difficult to define an overall length of the synopsis. However, it should be concise as far as possible and avoid repetition. It can be from 1500 to a few thousand words only. After writing synopsis, and once your synopsis are approved, then you will start writing your dissertation. And before writing dissertation, it is again necessary to know the structure of the dissertation. The first step of structure of dissertation is introduction. It is similar as the introduction of the synopsis, although it will be more lengthier. The first chapter should include a background of the problem and a statement of the issue. There must be clarity of the purpose of the study, followed by the research question. Mind it, research question is very necessary because that is a base of your other chapters. Your whole research work and other chapters should be the answer of research question you raised. You should provide clear definition of the term related to the work. You will also expose your assumptions and expectation of the final result. Then the second step is literature review. Literature review, I have already described and mentioned how to write the literature review and what is the meaning of literature review when I was telling you about the literature review you have to write in the synopsis. The second is methodology. That means which type of research methodology you are using, whether you are using a primary data or secondary data or both. While you are collecting a data, the sample size should be normal. It should not be too small or too large. The technique of collecting data in the form of a questionnaire, interviews, or a direct observation. Once you collect the data, you have to analyze the data, which should be analyzed according to the requirement of the topic. After collecting the data, it is to be tabulated, and the total variables used are to be included in the study, and then the relationship between the variable will be analyzed. After doing extensive research, you sum up with findings. This is very important point in the whole process of the research for the reason that it reflects your cerebral aptitude or intellectual ability. In findings, you retrieve the research questions and discuss the outcomes. The last part of your dissertation is conclusion. You will summarize the study and briefly report the results and outcomes. Make an emphasis to explain that how your findings make a difference in the academic community and how they are implied in practice. The last is a recommendation and suggestion. This part is the end chapter of your research, where you propose future research that will clarify the issues further. Explain why you suggest this research and what form it should take. And at the end of the research, there is bibliography, which should be written in a proper format. And as I told you, the format of bibliography will be my new topic of the next video. This is all about the structure of synopsis and structure of dissertation. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned many things, but if you want any elaborative notes, you may visit to my website, that is priyasepaha.com, for all the elaborative notes which I mentioned in my website. Till then, goodbye.
Hi everyone, welcome to Basic Science Series. I'm your host Lokendra Kumar. I'm here to announce that I'm going to make a series of videos on composition of a research article. I will make those videos and I will discuss what is a research article and what are the different components of research article. In that series, I'm going to discuss one by one every component of a research article. For example, I will discuss title, I will discuss abstract, I will discuss introduction, result, discussion, as well as conclusion. So I'm gonna provide you guidelines that will help you to write the research article. In scientific world, writing is really important, and what you discover is you have to write that in the form of a document, and that document is called research article. And research article has different components. For example, it has title. Title has specific requirements and you have to make that title catchy. And how you can make those titles really of your research articles really catchy, there are some guidelines that you can follow. Now, next thing you have abstract, and that is a small text body of your research article. It has to be between 150 to 300 word approximately, and in that particular section you have to provide all the details of your research article in a very interesting way. Next is the introduction, how you introduce your article, and then you have method section where you describe the method that you have done, and then a result as well as the discussion section, which are really important, and they are the core of your research article. So in those video series, I'm going to discuss every component in detail. For example, first video, I will focus on the title, and we will discuss a few of the examples from various journal and various research articles. I want to focus majorly on biosciences and various areas of biosciences, for example, biotechnology, microbiology, bioinformatics, as well as immunology. And there are, we can discuss various topics and as well as various interesting titles. And that will help you to design the title of your own research article. So in the same way, I'm going to make videos on other topics like abstract, result, discussion, and conclusion. That will definitely help you to understand the composition of a research article. Writing is really important, so I hope those videos will help you if you are young in the field of research. So I'm looking forward to making all those videos. So if you want to get updates on my videos, so please subscribe to the channel, and if you like my videos, please press the like button, because that helps me understanding how many people are watching my videos, and that motivates me to make more videos. Thank you and take care. Hi everyone, welcome to Basic Science Series. I'm your host Lokendra Kumar. I'm here to announce that I'm going to make a series of videos on composition of a research article. I will make those videos and I will discuss what is a research article and what are the different components of research article. In that series, I'm going to discuss one by one every component of a research article. For example, I will discuss title, I will discuss abstract, I will discuss introduction, result, discussion,
Let's
as
talk
well as
in a little bit
conclusion.
more detail now
I'm gonna
about
provide
reviewing
you
a
guidelines
research
that will
paper.
help you to write the
There are
research
certain
article.
aspects of a research paper
In
that
scientific
you
word, writing is really
expect
important.
to see in a
And,
manuscript.
what you discover
And let's go over
is
what
you
those
have to
are
write
so
that
that
in the
if you're
form of a
reviewing a
document,
research
and that
paper,
document
you
is
know
called
exactly
research
what to
article.
look for.
And research article
First
has
of all, the
different
paper should
components. For
begin with
example,
some
it has
introduction
title.
problem
Title
statement that sets
has
the
specific
tone,
requirements,
significance of the problem,
and you have
why
to
it's
make
even
that
important
title
to study.
catchy, and how you can make
A
those
research paper
titles
must
really
have a
of your
review of
research
the
articles
literature
really
section.
catchy. There are
I'm
some
so
guidelines
surprised
that you can
as
follow.
an editor
Now,
of
next
the
thing you
number
have
of research
abstract,
papers
and
I
that
receive
is
for which there's
a small
absolutely no review of
text
the
body
literature.
of your research article.
The review of the
It has
literature
to be
section really
between,
provides the reader
150
with a
to
synopsis of
300
what is
word
known about the
approximately,
topic,
and
what is
in that
not known
particular
about the
section, you
topic,
have to
and how
provide
this
all the
research
details
fills
of
the
your
gap in
research
the
article
literature.
in a
So when
very,
you're looking at
very
the review of the
interesting way.
literature,
Next
it should
is
be
the introduction,
adequate,
how you
it should be
introduce
up
your
to date,
article,
it should be
and then you
relevant,
have method
and it
section where
really
you
should help the
describe
reader
the
know
method that you have done,
how this
and then
research that's
result
being
as well
reported
as the discussion
fits
section, which are
into the
really,
body of
really
literature.
important, and they
Next
are
in the
core of your
paper,
research
after the
article.
review of the literature, there should be
So in
the
those
purpose,
video
the
series,
aims,
I'm going to
and/or the
discuss every
hypothesis
component
for the
in detail.
study.
For example,
And
first
they should
video I will
clearly
focus
flow
on
from
the
that
title,
literature
and we will
search.
discuss
They
a
can
few
be
of the
stated
examples
as
from
hypotheses
various
with
journals
a relationship,
and
a
various
direction,
research
or as a
articles.
null
I
hypothesis.
want to focus
It could be
majorly
stated
on
simply as review
biosciences and
questions,
various areas
or
of
as
biosciences, for example,
research
biotechnology,
aims,
microbiology,
or research
bioinformatics,
questions.
as well as immunology.
Next
and there
is
are,
the method
we
section.
can discuss various topics,
And here
and
we
as well
want
as
to
various
have
interesting titles,
first to be
and
assured
that will help
that
you
the
to design
research was
the title
approved
of your
by
own
an
research article.
institutional review
So
board.
in the same way, I'm going to make
No
videos
research
on
paper
other
can be
topics
published
like
for
abstract,
which
result, discussion, and
IRB
conclusion.
approval has
That
not been
will
obtained.
definitely help you to
I can tell you
understand
as
the
an
composition
editor,
of a
I've had
research
to
article.
return and
Writing is
reject
really important,
research
so I
papers
hope those videos
because the
will help you
researcher
if you are
never
very young
obtained
in the field of
proper
research.
approval
So
through their
I'm looking
university
forward
or
to
their
making all those
institution.
videos.
And the
So if you
purpose
want to
of
get
that
updates
approval
on
is
my
for the
videos,
protection
so
of
please
the human
subscribe to the
rights
channel,
of the
and if you
subjects.
like my videos, please
Protection of
press the
those
like button,
subjects.
because that helps
So
me
do not even
understanding
bother
how
to
many people are
submit a
watching
research
my
paper
videos, and
if you
that
cannot
motivates me to
provide
make
a
more videos.
statement in
Thank
the
you,
paper
and take care.
that you had the institutional review board approval for your research. Next in the methods section, you want the author to describe their sample. What was the
Hi
inclusion
everyone,
criteria?
welcome to Basic Science
the
Series. I'm your host
exclusion
Lokinda Kumar.
criteria?
I'm here to
How were the
announce
sample
that I'm going to
obtained?
make a series of videos on
As a
composition
reviewer,
of a
you
research
need to make
article.
sure that the
I will make those
sampling method
videos, and I will
really
discuss
is
what is a
appropriate
research
for the
article
research
and what are the
question.
different components
Is the
of research
sample
article.
size adequate? Does it reflect the appropriate population? Next, you'll critique the research design. Is the design the
In that
appropriate
series, I'm going
design
to
to
discuss
answer the research
one
question?
by one every component of a research article.
Is
For
this
example, I
really
will
a
discuss
pilot
title,
study,
I will
or is
discuss
this
abstract,
a
I will
regular
discuss
research
introduction,
study?
result,
That should be
discussion, as
clarified
well as
right from the
conclusion.
start.
So
In the
I'm gonna
design,
provide you
the
guidelines
author
that will
should
help
tell you about
to
the
write the research
variables that
article.
are being studied, the
In
independent
scientific
and
word,
dependent
writing is
variables,
really
and any
important.
confounding
And
variables.
what you discover
All of this
is
should be
you have
laid
to
out
write that in the
clearly
form of a
in the
document, and
methods
that document
section.
is called
Also,
research
data
article.
collection
And
procedures
research
should be
article
clear.
has different components. For example,
And if
it has
a
title,
reader would want to
title
replicate the
has
study,
specific
the
requirements,
collection process should be
and
so
you have
clear
to make
that they would be
title
able to
catchy,
replicate if
and
needed.
how you can make those
The next step
titles
in the
really
review of the
of your
research
research
article
articles really
is
catchy.
to look at
There
the
are some
instrument
guidelines that
section
you can
of
follow.
the paper.
Now, next thing you
Are
have
the
an
instruments
abstract, and
described
that is
adequately?
a small
The
text
author should
body
tell
of
the
your
reader
research
the
article.
purpose of the
It has
instrument,
to be between
content,
150
the type of
to
instrument.
300 word approximately.
Information
And
should be
in that
provided
particular
about
section, you
reliability
have to
and
provide
validity
all
of
the
the
details
instrument.
of your research article.
It's important
in
as a reviewer
very,
when you
very
critique the
interesting
paper
way. Next
that you
is the
assure that
introduction,
the
how you
instruments are
introduce your
appropriate to
article,
measure the
and then you
variables
have method
in the
section where
research
you
questions.
describe the method that you have done, and
The
then
author
the
needs to
result
clearly
as well
describe
as the
how the
discussion section,
instrument
which are
was
really
administered to the
important, and
subject.
they are the core
Was
of
it a
your research
survey?
article.
Was it an interview? Exactly
So
what
in
were the
those
procedures done
video
to
series,
administer
I'm
the
going to
instrument
discuss
to the
every
subjects.
component in detail.
Next
For
is
example,
the data
first video I will
analysis
focus
section.
on the title,
In
and we
this
will
section,
discuss
you want to
a
be
few
sure
of the
that the
examples
appropriate
from various
statistical
journals
tests were used
and various
based on
research
the level
articles.
of measures
I want to focus
and based on
majorly on
the variables that
biosciences
were being
and
studied.
various area of biosciences.
The
for
author should
example,
have set
biotechnology,
a level of
microbiology,
significance for
bioinformatics,
their study,
as well as immunology,
and
there
each
are,
table and
we
figure
can
that they
discuss
provide
various,
in the paper
topics,
should be
and as
clearly
well as various
labeled,
interesting
easy to
titles,
follow,
and
and
that will
correct
help you
and
to
accurate.
design
You want to
the
be
title
sure
of your own
that
research
the
article.
researcher and
So
author
in the same
have
way,
not
I'm going to make
violated
videos
any
on
of the
other topics
assumptions
like
for the
abstract,
statistical
result,
tests that
discussion,
they
and
use.
conclusion. That will
Finally,
definitely help you to
the paper
understand
should
the composition of a research
conclude
article.
with a
Writing
discussion
is really
section.
important, so I hope
And
those
here's where I
videos will
found
help
as an
you if
editor
you are
that
young
most of
in,
the problems
in the field of
arise.
research. So
Let's say, for
I'm
example,
looking
that the
forward to making all
researcher
those videos.
told us
So
that they
if you
had
want to
an
get
adequate
updates on
sample
my
size,
videos,
they were
so
using
please subscribe to the
instruments
channel,
that were
and if you
reliable
like my
and
videos,
valid,
please press the like button,
but the
because that
results
helps
did
me
not support
understanding how
the
many people are
hypothesis.
watching my videos, and that
The
motivates me to make more
researchers
videos.
predicted
Thank you,
that there
and
would
take care.
be a significant relationship between variables, but in reality, the results show there was no significant relationship at all.
Hi everyone.
So the mistake
Welcome
I
to Basic Science
see
Series. I'm your host,
authors
Lokinder Kumar.
making is,
I'm here to
in the
announce that
discussion
I'm going to
section,
make
they
a series of
pretend they
videos
found
on
what they
composition
wanted
of
to
a
find.
research article.
They
I will
write
make
and
those
say,
videos,
well, if
and
my
I will
sample
discuss
had been
what
bigger,
is a
I would have
research
found
article
what I
and what
wanted
are
to
the
find.
different components
If
of
my
research article.
instruments had been better, I really would have found that significant relationship. You can't do that in the discussion section. You have to discuss what you found.
In that series, I'm
Why
going to
didn't
discuss
you find a
one by
significant
one
relationship?
every component of a
You
research
must
article. For example, I
provide the
will
reader
discuss
with
title,
some
I will
explanation
discuss abstract,
for
I
your
will
true
discuss
findings,
introduction, result,
not
discussion,
an
as well
explanation
as
for the
conclusion.
findings
So
you
I'm
wish
going
you
to
had
provide
that
you
you
guidelines
don't
that
really
will help
have at
you
all.
to write the research
So
article.
that is a major reason for rejection
In
of
scientific
research
word, writing
papers
is really
is
important.
when the
And,
discussion section
what you
does
discover
not
is
flow
you have to
from
write that
the
in the form of
results
a
and
document,
doesn't
and
match
that
the
document is called
results.
research article.
Also, in
And
the
research
conclusion
article has
section of the
different
paper,
components. For example,
there should be a
it has
part that
title.
describes the
Title
limitations
has
of the
specific
study
requirements,
and a part that
and
describes
you have to make
areas
that
for future
title
research.
catchy, and how you can make those titles really of your research articles really catchy. There are some guidelines that you can follow. Now, next thing you have